It was the morning of February 24th, 2023, in the quiet Virginia suburb of Herndon. Inside a family home, police responded to a chilling emergency call that would soon unravel one of the most disturbing cases the area had ever seen. What seemed at first like a tragic home invasion quickly turned into something far more complex, something that left an entire community in shock. But let's start from the beginning. Christine was born in 1985 on Long Island, in the southeastern part of New York. She studied nursing at a local university, and it was there that she met her first and only love, Brendan, a year older than her, who was studying accountancy. He was handsome, athletic, and a passionate fan of American football, especially the Dallas Cowboys, and he quickly won her over with his sense of humor. It was no surprise then that she soon fell in love with him. And when he proposed, she happily said yes. After graduation, they had a quick wedding and began looking for a flat and jobs. In 2007, she was hired to work in the pediatric intensive care unit at a nearby hospital. Brendan, after a brief stint tutoring maths, got a job in 2009 at the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, the American Tax Authority. He was diligent, precise, and highly committed, and his efforts paid off. In 2019, he was promoted and joined the Criminal Investigations Division as a special agent, a move that required him to relocate. That same year, Christine gave birth to their daughter, whom they named Valerie. The three of them moved together to Herndon in Fairfax County, Virginia, where Brendan would begin his new role. They spent all the savings they had carefully set aside since their university years, around $800,000, on their dream home, a luxurious 2-story property with 5 bedrooms, 2 garages, and a well-kept driveway located in a peaceful, affluent neighborhood. They quickly settled into their new surroundings. Christine became known as a devoted mother and a kind friend. Neighbors adored her. She was the one who brought the local community together, organizing meetups for parents and bike rides for children. Although the couple earned good money, they still needed more. They had a young child, and maintaining such a home wasn't cheap. That's why Brendan, instead of relaxing in front of the TV in his free time, began driving for Uber. Christine, on the other hand, started taking on more and more shifts at the hospital. It's not hard to imagine that this kind of lifestyle, the constant chase for income, left them with less and less time for what should have been one of the most important parts of family life, their child. They were spending so many hours away from home that eventually they had to make a decision to hire someone to help with childcare. At the end of 2021, Christine came across the au pair program. She told friends that she would love to hire a young woman from South America, someone polite, well-mannered, warm and trustworthy, someone they could befriend and rely on. And so, into their lives entered Juliana, a 21-year-old woman from Brazil. Like many young people from her part of the world, Juliana had long dreamt of America. She had grown up on the impoverished outskirts of São Paulo, far from anything resembling luxury. Her mother, Mariana, did everything she could to give her beloved daughter the best life possible, but as a single parent working as a house cleaner, she barely made ends meet. Juliana was determined to change that. She had often told her family and friends that she wanted to experience a better life, to learn English, see the world, gain work experience, and help her mother. One day, her dream came true. She was accepted into the au pair program, and along with thousands of other young women, she flew to Virginia. The offer she received was irresistible. She was to care for the 4-year-old daughter of a wealthy and very kind couple. The job came with a generous allowance, shared accommodation, free meals, and the best part was she could keep all the money for herself. It couldn't have worked out better. From the very beginning, she felt at ease in her new environment. Her employers made her feel cared for, appreciated, like part of the family. She quickly bonded with them and, just as easily, with their daughter. 24th February 2023, 7:30 in the morning. Juliana was planning to take 4-year-old Valerie on a trip to the zoo. It was meant to be a fun day out, full of laughter, games and animals, while her parents got on with their own plans. Christine had stayed at home, while Brendan had left for work at around 7:10. They'd already been driving for a while when Juliana suddenly realized she'd forgotten the lunchboxes. She knew Valerie would soon get hungry and start to fuss, and the zoo was quite far away. So, like it or not, they had to turn back. As they pulled up to the house, something didn't seem quite right. Juliana noticed a car parked in the driveway, one she didn't recognize. A moment later, she spotted something else, the shadow of a person moving inside the house. It caught her off guard, perhaps even frightened her a little. Instinctively, she reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and called Christine to ask if someone was supposed to be there. There was no answer. At 7:37, Juliana phoned Brendan. She urged him to leave work immediately and check what was going on. She said she feared someone might have broken into the house. Brendan hadn't gone far. Although he was meant to start work at 7:30, he had been running late. At that moment, he was still parked outside a nearby McDonald's, where he'd planned to grab some breakfast. After speaking to Juliana, he quickly rang his wife. But the call went straight to voicemail. He rushed to the house. It only took him a few minutes to get there. Instead of using the front door, he and Juliana entered through the basement. It felt like the safer option. The whole time, Juliana was gripped by a growing sense of dread. And as it turned out, her instincts were right. The house seemed quiet and calm, but only on the surface. Moments later, they both heard something. Strange noises, shouts, the sound of some kind of commotion, coming from the second floor. For safety, Juliana and the child stayed downstairs. Brendan, however, decided to quietly investigate what was happening to his wife. He crept upstairs, careful not to make a sound. He opened the bedroom door, and what he saw was every husband's worst nightmare. Inside their marital bedroom stood a stranger. The man had a knife, and Christine, Brendan's wife, was fighting for her life, barely holding on. Brendan was terrified, but he didn't panic. "Police!" he shouted out of instinct, hoping the sudden cry would startle the intruder and make him run. But the man didn't move. He didn't even turn around. Brendan had to act and reached for the service weapon he kept on his belt. A gunshot rang out. Startled, Juliana ran upstairs and froze at the sight before her. Christine was badly wounded, and Brendan was still holding the gun. He told her to get the pistol from the safe. Still in shock, she obeyed. When she returned, she noticed that the man on the floor was still moving. Brendan urged her to make sure he didn't survive, and once again she followed his command. Afterwards, Juliana called emergency services. Her hands were trembling as she dialed the number at 8:02 a.m., her voice unsteady as she told the operator what had happened. Brendan then took over the call and claimed that a man had broken into their home, that he had killed him in self-defense while trying to protect his wife, and that he did not know who the intruder was. Police arrived shortly after. Neighbours, already alarmed by the commotion, had gathered outside, murmuring in disbelief. Such violence was unheard of in the quiet neighbourhood. Juliana, traumatised, was found crouched by the garage, struggling to breathe. When approached by officers, she began to explain, her hands moving as she tried to describe the events. She claimed the man had threatened to kill Christine and started stabbing her. She said Brendan had fired a shot and asked her to help, and that she had never seen the man before. The officers proceeded upstairs to the master bedroom and were confronted with a harrowing scene. A man and a woman lying on the floor. Christine was still alive, though gravely injured, and was rushed to a nearby hospital in a desperate attempt to save her life.
Leave people upstairs. I can talk to her if you want. Thank you. I'm sorry. What's going on this morning?
I was going out.
It's okay. Take a breath. It's okay. Take a minute, okay? You want want to sit down somewhere? No?
I just need the water.
Okay.
He said, wait for me, I'll go there. Don't go inside. And then he came back here. And we went inside. And then we went upstairs first, and then I went to see what's going on. And I heard the guy was, I don't know what.
It's okay.
I don't know what he was doing. It's spanking her. I don't know.
You was what?
It's spanking her. And I heard, I don't know, what was that?
Okay. You want me to see if I can try to get you some water?
He hadn't been as lucky. For the man on the floor, it was already too late, and the tragic news didn't stop there. Despite the doctor's best efforts over the next few hours, Christine's life could not be saved either. The autopsy later confirmed what witnesses had already claimed. The woman had died from stab wounds, the unknown man from gunshot wounds. Those witnesses were her husband Brendan and the nanny, Juliana. The timeline of events was starting to take shape. That morning, an intruder had entered the couple's home. He likely believed no one would be inside. After all, he had just seen a woman leaving the house with a child and a man driving off in a car. But when he unexpectedly encountered Christine in the bedroom, he panicked, and in a moment of desperation, he decided to silence her. Fate, however, intervened. Brendan, Christine's husband, walked in at just the wrong moment for the intruder. There was just one major problem. There were no signs of forced entry. Police conducted an extensive search of the property, but found no broken windows, no damaged locks, no kicked-in doors. Nothing to suggest a break-in. This raised an important question. Had the man simply walked through an unlocked door? It was possible. In the rush of the morning routine, perhaps someone had forgotten to secure it, and he had taken advantage. But investigators couldn't ignore another possibility. What if he'd been let in? What if the victim had known him? Neither Juliana nor Brendan recognized the man, but the only way to answer this growing mystery was to determine exactly who he was. That part, at least, was solved quickly. The man found inside the house was 39-year-old Joseph, a quiet, reserved and reportedly gentle man from Springfield. He lived with his grandmother and a small chihuahua in a modest home. He enjoyed video games and martial arts. He had no criminal record. He didn't use drugs. He wasn't in psychiatric treatment. He had no history of schizophrenia or any other disorder that might explain sudden violence. He had never stolen anything, never broken into a home. It just didn't match his character. Neighbors and relatives were shocked. They described him as shy, introverted, even awkward around women. He spent a lot of time on dating sites, but he had no known connection to any criminal underworld. His devastated family insisted if he went to that house, he must have had a reason. He must have been invited. The theory of a dangerous burglar, driven by robbery, was starting to unravel, especially as nothing in the house suggested any intent to steal. The real questions were now these. Why had Joseph gone to Christine and Brendan's home? Had he known Christine? Why was he carrying a knife? Why had he attacked? Was he, as some began to wonder, her lover? At this point, detectives hit a wall. The version of events told by Juliana, the nanny, was starting to raise serious doubts. The more time passed, the more her story didn't add up. Why, for instance, after realizing she had forgotten the lunch, didn't she just go back inside the house? Why had she been so frightened by the sight of an unfamiliar car in the driveway? Why, when Christine didn't answer the phone, did she immediately call Brendan, and not simply wait a few minutes or check things herself? There could have been countless reasons for a strange car being parked there. Christine might have had an unexpected visitor, perhaps a friend from the past, or an old colleague, and yet Juliana reacted with panic. Why? Juliana had no real reason to be afraid, yet she clearly had her doubts. And would you, in her place, not feel the same? For whatever reason, the young woman instantly assumed that Kristen was in danger. She was right, of course, but how could she have known that? She hadn't mentioned hearing any voices or screams before entering the house, and what investigators found particularly curious was that Juliana had called the emergency number more than once that morning. The first call came at 7:47 a.m. The operator answered, but Juliana didn't say a word. She hung up just seconds later. Only some muffled groaning was heard in the background. After that, she rang 9112 more times and hung up both times again. A proper conversation with the dispatcher didn't happen until 8:02 a.m., a full 13 minutes later. Such behavior was anything but normal. What stood out even more was how blindly she followed Brendan's instructions, without a second thought. She was undoubtedly in shock, but she must have been at least partially aware of what she was doing, and what the consequences might be. Why did she run to get a second weapon when Brendan already had one? She didn't need to do that, nor did she need to fire again. By that point, the man was no longer a threat. According to the doctors, he was already lying on the floor, completely blind. Her version of events didn't quite match up with a claim of self-defense. There was something else that made detectives pause. Brendan claimed he was heading to work, a job that was meant to start at 7:30 a.m. But instead of going straight there, he parked outside a nearby fast food restaurant. He claimed he wanted breakfast, yet for over 20 minutes he stayed in the car without getting out. He looked like someone who was waiting. Investigators had a gut feeling that there was more to this case than met the eye, something deeper, something they hadn't uncovered yet, and so they decided to search the couple's house again, only this time from a different angle. They hoped to find something missed in the earlier sweep, something subtle, a clue that might link the family to the man who had ended up in their home that day. They began with the home computers, and in the browser history they found something intriguing. Someone in the house had recently been visiting fetish websites, frequently. On such sites, there is no shortage of dangerous people, people who find pleasure in pain. Could this be what had brought such a nightmare into this family's life? Detectives scoured these pages for hours, looking for a trail, and their instincts proved right. On one particular role-play dating site, they discovered a profile created by 37-year-old Kristin under the name Anastasia 9. She had uploaded a recent photo in a swimsuit, listed her preferences, and filled in all the necessary details for finding partners. The account was fairly new, and her message history was short, but one thread stood out: her conversations with Joseph Ryan, the 39-year-old man found in her house. That's how they knew each other. That's why there were no signs of forced entry. Christine had let him in. It became clear she had been hiding something, living a double life, meeting men from questionable websites. At least one mystery was solved. Everything pointed to the fact that on the morning of 24th February, Christine and Joseph had arranged a very specific encounter. She had planned for Juliana to be out that day, taking her daughter to the zoo. The laptop still had the ticket details. In her absence, Joseph was to come over and act out a scripted adult fantasy. He would tie her up, rip her clothes, and she would pretend to be shocked and scared. But the fantasy was interrupted. Brendan and Juliana walked in on what they believed was a real attack. They didn't know it was just a game. Everything started to line up. Juliana and Brendan had both claimed they found an unknown man standing over a terrified Christine, and that seemed to be true. But if Joseph and Christine were only meant to play, why had Joseph hurt her? That question for now remained unanswered. But another problem soon arose. Who should be charged, Juliana or Brendan? Despite Brendan's confession during the emergency call, forensics and Juliana's testimony suggested otherwise. Brendan had only subdued the intruder. It was Juliana who delivered the final fatal shot. Just as it seemed that everything was falling into place and the prosecutor's office was preparing to charge the young woman and bring her before a court, cracks began to appear in the theory investigators had been relying on. The doubts began when detectives took a closer look at the online messages exchanged between Christine and Joseph. They compared these to past conversations, analysed their respective communication styles, and spoke with relatives, friends, and employers. The findings were surprising. While Joseph's messages were consistent and credible, the same couldn't be said for Christine's. The language used in the profile didn't match her way of writing at all. She used abbreviations and phrases her family and friends swore she never used. They were convinced she could not have written those messages. If not her, then who? Who had a reason to impersonate her and arrange a meeting with a stranger in her own home? Investigators asked themselves the same question, and they soon found the answer. In October 2023, 7 months after the tragedy, detectives decided to search the couple's house again, this time with a fresh perspective, hoping to uncover something they may have overlooked. They didn't have to look far. As soon as they entered the upstairs bedroom, the very same one where the incident had taken place, they were left speechless. There, on the nightstand, stood a framed photo of a smiling couple in love. But the photo didn't show Brendan and Christine. It showed Juliana, the 23-year-old nanny, and Brendan, the same Juliana who had been living with the couple for several months. The photo was analysed straight away. It had been taken just a few days earlier, but that wasn't the end of the revelations. Inside the bedroom wardrobe and elsewhere in the room, even on the bed, officers found Juliana's clothes and underwear, along with more photos. Some were intimate. One was from a concert, another from a trip to New York, which had taken place just a month before Christine's death. By that point, detectives were certain Brendan and Juliana had been having an affair. They had effectively been living as a couple, under the same roof Christine once shared with her husband. Juliana had stepped into Christine's place just months after her death. But that raised another question. What kind of relationship was it? Because that could make all the difference. Detectives dug deeper, their suspicions growing darker by the hour. They soon discovered that just 8 and 12 days before the incident, Juliana and Brendan had replaced their phones, wiped their histories, and Juliana had set up a new iCloud account. And that wasn't all. 2 months earlier, the nanny and her employer had been seen together at a shooting range in Ashburn. Staff at the facility later told police that Brendan had returned alone on 28 January 2023, just 1 month before the tragedy. He had gone there to buy a gun, the same gun, in fact, that Juliana later used to kill Joseph, the same weapon she claimed to have pulled from the safe to protect herself, Brendan and Christine. But if she was only acting in self-defense, why had she been training to shoot? Why did both she and her supposed lover change their phones? Why did Brendan buy a weapon when he already had access to an official service firearm? Was the tragedy in that house simply a terrible coincidence, or was it meticulously planned? Just days after this second search, Juliana was arrested. Though she didn't deny killing Joseph, she firmly denied having an affair with Brendan. She insisted that their relationship had always been professional. She stuck firmly to her original story, that a stranger had broken into the house and she had fired the weapon to protect her loved ones. Brendan, on the other hand, took a different approach. He invoked the Fifth Amendment and refused to answer any uncomfortable questions. He also consistently declined to give interviews to the media, but the silence only fueled public suspicion. Even though no charges had been filed against him, his refusal to cooperate, both with police and the press, spoke volumes. It gave journalists and internet sleuths all the more reason to speculate. As more details emerged each day, voices grew louder that Brendan was just as guilty as Juliana. Some believed that was why he refused to speak, not only to avoid incriminating himself, but to avoid confronting the reality of his own infidelity. When a photo of Juliana and Brendan, the one found on the nightstand, leaked to the media, the response was explosive. No one doubted it anymore. The two were involved, and the theory began to spread that together they had orchestrated a complex and cruel plot against Christine. They had created a fake profile on a fetish site in her name, lured an innocent man into their home, and used him as a scapegoat. Because in the end, Joseph hadn't harmed Christine. Controversial as his interests may have been, and distasteful to some, he hadn't come with malicious intent. He simply wanted to have some fun, with consent. According to friends, he was a bit old-fashioned, but he respected women. That's why he sought out partners through those platforms, so no one would feel threatened or disrespected. He hadn't deserved to die. No one could understand why Brendan had made such a decision. People kept asking, why hadn't he simply chosen divorce? That would have been the easiest and most obvious path. Perhaps he feared that his wife would restrict his access to their child. Maybe it was about money, joint financial interests that hadn't yet come to light. The case, already sparking heated public debate and growing more emotional by the day, drew the attention of Juliana's mother, Mariana, who lived permanently in Brazil. As one might expect, she was terrified. She simply couldn't believe that her daughter could have done something so horrific, let alone acted alone. On 24th October, just a few days after the arrest, Mariana contacted journalists from News 4 to offer her statement. The interview was conducted in Portuguese and translated into English. At the start of the conversation, Mariana expressed deep concern for Juliana, saying she was very worried and longed for her to return home to Brazil. She admitted that, although she hadn't spoken with her daughter since the arrest, she was convinced Juliana had no reason to hurt Christine. She had always got on well with the whole family. There had been no conflicts with her employer, or at least none that Mariana had been aware of. She finished by expressing her disappointment that only her daughter had been charged, not her employer. She must speak the truth, Mariana said. She must say that Brendan is also to blame. She must say what really happened in that house, what events unfolded there. I pray the prosecution and the court will see who is truly guilty, and it is not Juliana, she concluded. By that time, the detectives on the case were overwhelmed with work, gathering evidence, analysing clues, and formulating yet another theory. Much like the media, they now strongly believed that the lovers had conspired to get rid of the inconvenient wife. Using a bikini photo that Christine had sent her husband just a month earlier, they had created a fake profile on a niche fetish dating site, a site Christine had never used before and likely hadn't even known about. They had sought a suitable victim, and once they'd found him, they had lured him to the house under the pretense of a kinky rendezvous. When Joseph, completely unaware of the plot, entered the property through a door that had been deliberately left unlocked for him, Juliana put their plan into motion. She rang Christine, but the call went to voicemail. Brendan had switched off her phone and hidden it in a kitchen drawer to make sure she wouldn't find it. When her boss didn't pick up, just as they had planned, Juliana called Brendan instead. She told him she was terrified, though they both knew there was nothing to fear. The man in the house wasn't an intruder. He was the very man they themselves had invited. Brendan had been waiting for the call in a nearby McDonald's. When he answered, he returned home. The couple entered through the basement, where they had planned to leave little Valerie, and then headed up to the bedroom, where Christine and Joseph were already present. Afterwards, Juliana called emergency services multiple times. She then opened the bathroom safe, likely to support her version of events, and, according to medical examiners, one of them transferred Christine's genetic material onto Joseph, to pin the blame on him. Despite this abundance of circumstantial evidence, despite the strong motive and a timeline that appeared all too convincing, for some reason, Juliana continued to protect Brendan. She denied having a romantic relationship with him, insisting that nothing intimate had ever taken place. But her version of events would soon shift. She eventually admitted that yes, there had been some physical closeness between them, but insisted that neither of them had taken it seriously. Brendan had cheated on his wife many times before, she claimed, and Christine had also been unfaithful. There had never been love between them, only physical attraction. They had never planned a future together. There had been no conspiracy, and besides, she said, no one could be sure she had even fired the fatal shot. But the forensic pathologist was sure. He concluded that it had not been the first shot, but the second fired by Juliana that had ended Joseph's life. And although the events surrounding Joseph's death now appeared mostly resolved, the question of who had truly harmed Christine remained unanswered. One thing was certain. Despite what Juliana and Brendan claimed, Joseph had not hurt her. As Juliana remained in custody, without bail, due to the high risk of her fleeing to Brazil, she maintained daily contact with Brendan and his mother Teresa. She called and messaged them using a tablet provided in jail. Both, in separate messages, urged her to stay silent, reminding her that all calls were being recorded. His mother even took things a step further. Through Brendan's lawyer, she tried to deliver some kind of package to Juliana, possibly a letter or an instruction. In the months following Juliana's arrest, while Brendan continued to live at the family's house with his daughter and his mother, strains developed in the couple's relationship. In a recorded jail call, Juliana Perez Magalhães can be heard saying, "I hope you are not just staying with me because you are afraid I'm going to turn against you." In another taped conversation found on his mother's phone, prosecutors say, Brendan complained that the nanny can't keep her goddamn mouth shut on calls from jail. Behind bars, she wrote long letters to her family in Brazil. "I'm tired of this place, of this whole situation," she confided. "I'm unhappy. Nothing brings me joy anymore. I just want to leave and go home." Meanwhile, the nanny's solicitor did everything in his power to ensure Brendan would also end up behind bars. He argued that both had taken an active part in the events, and the notion of a conspiracy was absurd. His client had never taken the relationship seriously. Juliana had profiles on dating apps and was openly flirting with other men. Although the young woman had remained silent on the details for almost a year. In April 2024, she decided to break that silence. She did so when she realized her partner was trying to frame her at all costs, desperate to avoid punishment by invoking the Fifth Amendment, refusing to take responsibility for what he had done, even though he knew she would be the one sent to prison. On 29th of October 2024, in exchange for testifying against Brendan, Juliana accepted a plea deal. Under its terms, she no longer faced up to 43 years behind bars, but a maximum of 10. And even that seemed unlikely, provided she continued to cooperate. It was expected that she would be released shortly after sentencing. It was under these circumstances that Juliana finally confessed to being part of the conspiracy. She admitted that she had indeed had an affair with her employer. Their relationship began in August 2022, a few months after she had moved into his home to care for his daughter. They kept it hidden from Christine, and at first neither of them seemed to mind keeping things secret. But by autumn 2022, everything had changed. Brendan began hinting more and more often that he wanted to get rid of Christine so that he and Juliana could be together, raise his daughter as a couple, and live in the house she adored. And so, from conversations to actions, they found themselves laying out a plan. Brendan came up with what he considered a brilliant idea. He created a fake profile for his wife on the fetish website and began chatting with users to find the right candidate. Eventually, he chose Joseph. At first, the two men messaged through the site, but in the days leading up to the incident, they switched to Telegram, a free, fast and encrypted messaging app. At that point, Juliana also joined the conversation with Joseph, pretending to be Christine. During a voice call, she confirmed all the details of their meeting and promised he was in for a thrilling night of roleplay. Brendan made sure she knew exactly what to do, how to behave, how to hold the gear, how to use it. That morning, he handed it to her himself. As the investigators had suspected, they had opened the safe deliberately to mislead. "I didn't want to go through with the plan," Juliana later said. "I broke down. I didn't want to do it. But Brendan told me we'd already gone too far, and there was no way back." Brendan was arrested on the 16th of September and charged the following month, just days after Juliana accepted her plea deal. The most damning piece of evidence was that, according to the investigation, it was Brendan, not his lover, who had taken Christine's life. and he had attempted to frame Joseph by transferring Christine's biological material onto him. He was arrested during a routine traffic stop, and the operation was hailed as a major success by local law enforcement. At the press conference that followed, Fairfax County Sheriff Kevin Davis declared, "I had a feeling there was more to this case, and 570 days later, I can officially say we've arrested 2 individuals." Brendan has been indicted on charges of felony child abuse and neglect related to the events of February 24, 2023. These charges suggest that authorities are addressing concerns regarding Valerie's welfare during the incident. As a result, the trial was moved from 3rd February to 20th October 2025. Additionally, prosecutors have indicated that statements made by the 4-year-old child may be considered as evidence in Brendan Banfield's upcoming trial, highlighting her potential role in the legal proceedings. Given the sensitive nature of the case and the involvement of a minor, further details about Valerie's current circumstances are unlikely to be publicly released to protect her privacy and well-being. But there are reports that the child's maternal grandparents are seeking full custody of their granddaughter. Juliana had absolutely no reason to harm Christine. According to witnesses, Christine had done everything to make Juliana feel at home, not just in their country, but especially in their house. She had surrounded her with love, care, and support. Juliana is expected to be sentenced on December 19, 2025, after her testimony in Brendan Banfield's October trial. As part of her plea deal, she pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter for her role in the death of Joseph Ryan. In exchange for her full cooperation, prosecutors have agreed to recommend a sentence limited to time already served. If she continues to cooperate fully, she will likely be released shortly after sentencing and then deported to Brazil. Ryan's friend Zulu Bay says he is grateful the truth is coming out about his eccentric pal's unwitting role in the twisted murder plot. "I know he didn't do what they said he did," says Bay. "He was just a pawn. Joe was the guy who took in the dogs that had no chance of being adopted and just loved the hell out of them. And Christine," says her friend Valderrama, "will be remembered for her service to community. She was unique." May we remember Christine for her compassion, her dedication, and her strength. May we honor Joseph as an innocent man whose life was stolen far too soon. And may little Valerie, despite all she has lost, grow up surrounded by love, truth, and the legacy of those who truly cared for her. Thank you for listening to this painful story. Until next time, be kind, stay safe, and never forget the victims.